Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Archives Book Club. I am joined by my co-host Andreseth. I am joined by Lord Cranial, who will be moderating chat, and of course, we are joined by the one, the only. You might know him from World Discussion with Agent Smith. You might know him from his appearances on Wayfarers, Howls by the Hearth. You might know him as Brunt, Half a Ton Mistrunner.
Hell yeah!
Or you might just know him as Neuro. Welcome on so much. So glad to have you.
What is up? It's good to be here. Once again, I have been summoned to discuss books. No, it's really cool. I think this idea first got its start with the Pylon Show episode we were both on together. And then the holidays happened, so it was kind of put more on the back burner for a bit. But this is some good stuff, and I'm really hyped to share some Hagakure with you all.
Yeah, I'm so excited. This book, just to set the stage for everybody, was Neuro's pick. This was not on my radar at all. I think I heard you mention it on stream, maybe. Adreseth, do you want to give us the throwdown on this book?
Yeah, this is a book with a lot of knowledge, and it has, depending on which version you read, it has slightly different translations. So the book that you may find if you look on Amazon or if you go to your bookstore, if people still do that these days, Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai, The Secret Wisdom of the Samurai, The Art of the Samurai, The Way of the Samurai, The Code of the Samurai. Depending on what you find out there, your mileage may vary. We're referencing the William Scott Wilson version today. That was the book that we read. And it's loosely covering kind of the life and times of Yamamoto Tsunetomo, and I know I'm going to butcher all these Japanese names because I do not know how to pronounce them, during the Edo period. And this is sort of his journey through being a samurai, learning under a samurai, and then becoming a Buddhist monk, then becoming an old man, and sort of putting his wisdom down in bullet points. And there are some parts that are a little bit dated. So when you read this, keep an open mind. It's an old text, but lots of good knowledge in there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting disclaimer, right? Because it's an ancient text and it's also not a Western text, right? So there's like a date, sort of there's a time component and also just a different cultural norms component here. So yeah, you might read some stuff that you're like, that's a little antiquated, or that doesn't really ring true for me, or whatever. I think this is one where you got to take from it what you can. Like, this guy did not write this book with us as the intended audience, right? He sort of, as Adreseth said, sort of almost had this second life where, as a samurai, he was supposed to basically ritually disembowel himself when his master died. That ended up not happening because of some, things that his master said, about not approving of that. He gets this sort of second chance at life, writes this stuff. Well, actually, he didn't even write it. A friend of his wrote it. And it was, conversations they had. It wasn't really intended for the three of us to talk about StarCraft, right? So you got to kind of caveat that a little.
Yes, this book is very much a mixed bag. I know there's that human desire for where's the perfect book that's going to allow me to guide all my decisions and I can just take this as a mold and then be shaped by it. Some of the stuff in it is inspiring and incredible and really refreshing for your perspective. And I've repeated some of these mantras to myself to give myself courage and strength. And then you'll read some passages within it and you're like, man, we've made a lot of progress since this era. There are some recommendations that are immoral and unethical and savage and barbaric. And then there's a tone in this which I find really amusing and timeless, which is this is kind of a grumpy boomer samurai, basically, where he is in his advanced ages. He served his term as a retainer, and then he's now living a life as a monk where he's not fighting people anymore. He's just telling samurai how lazy this generation is and how 100 years ago people used to be way more moral and principled and refined, and it's a shame what's happened. So I find all of that really amusing because you get a lot of that stuff every generation where the older generation, they have kind of a golden age fallacy of they remember the good parts and they forget some of the bad parts, and it does seem like civilization has been declining. But it is refreshing as well to note that we've made a lot of social progress, a lot of just progress regarding violence to each other, and we found more peaceful ways of resolving a lot of different issues. But there are so many gems in this that I definitely feel like it's worth talking about, even though there's some stuff that's questionable at best.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned sort of the the grumpy boomer angle, because it's funny, he's almost sort of self-aware of it too. Like there's I forget the exact quote. There's a line in there where he's like basically trying to pitch this as an opportunity to you, right? He's like, basically like samurai aren't manly anymore and the world is kind of shitty and it's coming to an end, but this is an opportunity because if you just try a little bit, you'll be so much less shitty than everybody else. That you'll have this huge advantage, right? He's like really he's trying to sell you on it, right? His grumpiness. It's funny.
Yeah, he claims that a lot of these shifts in your behavior and your thinking are very easy, which some of them very clearly are not. It's not easy to just reprioritize all of your thinking from here on out based on one single piece of advice. That would require a lot of daily effort and discipline, but it's a very encouraging book in a lot of ways too. I could start with maybe just the most notable quote so far that I've repeated the most and shared with the greatest number of people. I marked a lot of stuff in here, and I guess it doesn't necessarily need to be in order, but just to kind of start things off with how 2020 went and how a lot of us feel, this jumped out at me as really useful for us. It's on page 98, section 115. It is not sufficient just to remain calm in the event of catastrophe or emergency. When challenged by adversity, charge onwards with courage and jubilation. This is rising to a higher level. It is like saying, the more water there is, the higher the boat rises. Coincidentally, this book got water damage because my apartment was flooded, so I sort of feel like it's been blessed in a weird way.
Oh man, too good. Yeah,
courage and jubilation. Hell yeah. I really like that. I had never thought about it in that sense of bad stuff is happening. You should keep your shit together. That I'm familiar with. That's kind of been conditioned into a lot of us. But bad stuff is happening. You should embrace it as a challenge that allows you to be a badass. That's pretty cool. I like that.
This actually jumped out at me too. And I was so grateful for it because I've always kind of had a little bit of an impulse along these lines. So I grew up in Southern California. It feels like, I don't know, every 4 or 5 years or so, we catch on fire a lot. And, you're kind of like watching the news going, do I need to like grab my shit and flee from this fire? That kind of thing. So there's, I've lived through a handful of these sort of disasters. I've also, I'm in San Diego, like there have been, school shootings and just like terrible things, right? And I always kind of found myself like sort of primed to go, right? Where it's like, okay, there's shit's jumping off, like we got to be ready, right? And I almost felt like, oh God, is there like some sick, twisted part of me that's like excited by this, right? Like, why am I so like, why do I have this like adrenaline thing going on? Like, is there something wrong with me that I'm like hyped about this disaster kind of thing? And reading that passage really reframed it for me, where it's like, no, actually, you're just going, okay, let's sort of accept the reality that we're in, right? Shit's on fire. You might have to run from the fire. You might have to sort of solve a new problem, right? And perform trade-offs in a way that you're not used to, of like, all right, I've got my little car, my crappy beat up car. I'm 17 years old. How much of my shit can I put in it? Which shit should I take? Like it's not a normal problem for you to solve. And so to be like, okay, I can rise to that challenge. I can stay calm and I can evacuate and whatever. It felt a lot like what Sunetomo is talking about here, where it's like, yeah, it's not great that things are burning. It's not great that, people are going to lose their homes or whatever, but also it is an opportunity for you to do a good job here. So that was kind of just a personal connection that I sort of had to this.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
It's an interesting part of this book in general that, on the show, we talk usually about the application of StarCraft and really, delve into like, okay, this means you should watch a replay and then practice this. But this book is filled with life lessons throughout, right? So if you read this book, if you have a chance to pick it up, and it's quite short, so you should pick it up. Not only is it going to help you in your pursuit of StarCraft greatness, but this has so many good life lessons in it.
Yeah, the structure of it too, it's not a novel format where you go from beginning to end and it tells you a story per se. It's broken into sections where each one is kind of its own mini story or just a piece of wisdom or recommendation and that kind of thing. So you don't necessarily have to go cover to cover in order. You could just open random pages and read this and that, and you don't really get punished too much for doing that. But the catastrophe and crisis and emergency, it reminded me of a issue that I think we can all improve on, which is not being scared of our own danger response and our own kind of physical reaction to a higher stress situation. I think a lot of pop psychology has told us stress bad, stress causes you to put on weight, stress causes you to sleep less, all this. When stress is a response that means your body recognizes there's an elevated risk involved in situations.
Hmm.
It hypes up your adrenaline, a bunch of other different neurotransmitters are released into the body, and this is normal. This is our human bodies functioning as they've been evolutionarily adapted to. So when you feel that response in yourself, you can say, all right, let's fucking go. Instead of, oh, geez, I'm anxious.
Right.
And now I'm stressed that I'm anxious, and people start to feel like they need to push down their own like natural reaction to things, and they feel like there's something wrong with them when their heart's beating more and their hands a little bit shaky, arm spaghetti. But that's okay. So these kind of passages here, I think, give you a lot of stability in moments of risk and danger. It's definitely, I think, helped me for samurai streams that I've been doing and the tournament that I did this Monday, where my attitude was more, fuck yeah, let's just get it. Let's just play some games and be annoying. And I don't need to worry about any particular result. I'm just going to charge onwards.
Yeah, very cool. So I guess, we would be really missing something here if we didn't talk about your samurai streams. I have to imagine that folks who are listening to the archives are gonna be familiar with you and your work in StarCraft, but do you want to just kind of lay out sort of your thoughts around that, Neuro? Because I think it obviously maps very well onto the subject matter of this book.
Yeah, so the idea for Samurai Streams was to try to get a high intensity practice window in my week. With Classic WoW coming out, I've been dividing my time between two games instead of streaming pretty much just one game all the time. And I wanted to still maintain my ability and ideally improve my ability as a player, even if I can't ladder as much per week and do both. So that's a way of saying, okay, I'm not going to do the summons. I'm not going to do the silly voices. I'm not going to give commentary. I'm not going to try to do particular builds. I'm just going to try to win and fight and be the best player that I can be and have it be about my growth as a player instead of the audience's growth as players. Uh, there are very different issues in Platinum League than there are in mid GM. So if I'm playing a game and I need to analyze the replay, the part that sticks out to me that I really need to hammer down is probably going to be different than what a viewer would expect. A lot of times people focus on the big stuff like the rock, paper, scissors of composition. They see streamer lose and they say, oh, streamer, should you have built infestors? Should you have built this other unit for that main fight? Sometimes yes, but most of the time it's a supply block at 58. That
Yeah.
was actually my problem. It was me not punishing the Protoss for taking a third base with no defense, and I had 12 lings. Like these little subtleties in the early game that cause one player to get a really big lead and kind of run away with the game. That's what I'm really trying to iron down, but that's not fancy. It's not as exciting as, oh man, look at that Bane drop, or look at this amazing micro play. That's more the entertainment side. And by trade, I am a streamer, not a tournament player. So there's a natural kind of gravitational pull toward doing stuff that's funny, doing stuff that helps the intermediate player figure out the game, as opposed to how do I get from low mid GM to upper GM and beyond.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can empathize a little bit. Obviously, I don't make my living streaming the way that you do. But I've definitely made a shift recently that has been very positive for me in the sense that I am worrying less about chat interaction during games, and I'm worrying less about analyzing whatever part of the replay chat thinks is important, which I think really did me a pretty big disservice for, gosh, probably some years. I kind of grew up as a player on Twitch with, people who genuinely were better than me hanging out for most of that time. I mean, I started when I was bronze. And I kind of got conditioned to let chat lead me to the parts of the replay that they wanted to look at. And it robbed me of I robbed myself of the intentionality around my practice, where, maybe I'm trying to hammer out a specific problematic piece of an opening, and I'm literally just trying to like hit Terrans on ladder, right? Get through the PvPs, get through the PvCs. I just want to hit Terrans so I can do this part of the ladder where I got to like micro this one unit and then build that tech building. And like I just want that little interaction, right? And instead it's like chat's talking to me about some obscure, 3rex proxy thing into whatever, and like we end up spending 30 minutes talking about it. It's not, time efficient. So yeah, I definitely feel kind of a little piece, I think, of what maybe motivated you to do that. And I think it's really good. I think, people, if they're able to figure out how to work something like this into their practice, it'd be really, really good.
Yeah, I would highly recommend doing some sort of this practice where the essence of it isn't to necessarily read samurai words before you play StarCraft. It's to reduce the number of distractions whenever you're doing something that you consider to be very important. So I've had some people say, I do a samurai format of painting where I cut out all other distractions. I don't have other screens and monitors and stuff in front of me. I don't have phone alerts going off. I just maybe have some background music and do only painting for a period of time. And people have said that they make a lot of progress with that. And in 2021, it's really hard to remove distractions because we have so many. There are so many very important emails that you should respond to. There are so many Discord DMs, there's news popping off, tweets are always rolling. So when do you set all that aside and do something just for yourself? It requires a lot of effort to tell all that stuff to be quiet. I'm working on this right now.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of reminds me of a section in the book that talks a bit about what I would call detachment, where the idea is that you stop sort of taking the advice of others, and you sort of just focus in on what you need to do, and stop kind of silence the voices there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It also mentions single-minded purpose, which is
Mhm.
something that many of us don't really think about doing too much. Usually it's we're trying to juggle four things pretty well because we're the multitasking generation and we think that we're good at it, when we could just do one thing exceptionally well if we put ourselves to it.
Yeah, I wrote a quote in here that is interesting in the sense that it's a little bit of it almost seems like a counterpoint, but I think, once I fully understood it, it actually is in agreement with the section that Adraseth raises. And it's sort of on the subject of like seeking counsel from others being a form of like rooting ourselves. So the quote is, "It is, for example, like a large tree with many roots. One man's intelligence is like a tree that has been simply stuck in the ground." So the idea here being, if I'm just out on my own trying to figure this stuff out, I can sort of go astray. But if I can recognize where my flaws are, where my sort of deficiencies are, and I can seek counsel from somebody who I know has experience or has some wisdom around that, um, that I'm able to sort of get someone else's detachment, right? Leverage, maybe Adraseth knows about a subject that I don't, and he's not personally wrapped up in the problem that I'm having, so he can give me a detached perspective. And I think the fine line here is, if you overdo that, all of a sudden you've sort of lost your own purpose and your own drive towards your goal, and now you're just listening to everybody. But at the same time, if you're too driven and if you're too, I know what's right for me, and you never listen to anyone, then you're just a tree stuck in the ground. So it's an interesting kind of tenuous trade-off to me.
This is a very broad concept that I feel is a lot more prevalent in Eastern thinking than in Western thinking, and that's the pursuit of balance. where it's not telling you to pursue any one maximum. It's saying that there are these two extremes and you should strive for the midpoint. And I think this is another one of those examples where if you don't get enough input from other people, you'll be stuck in your ways. And if you receive too much input from people, you won't have any kind of personal voice in
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think particularly touching on the fact that we are largely, I think, on this podcast, at least a Western audience, and people can often be a little bit frustrated with a text like Hagakure because it will say something in one breath, like seek advice from others, and then it will say you should pursue a single-minded purpose and do your own thing and drive towards it. And as a Western listener, you're like, but wait, you just told me these two irreconcilable things. But kind of what Neuro's explaining here is there's a context, right? There's a context that everything is a balance and sort of lies on a continuum that you should try to optimize towards the middle of. And I, as a Western reader, lack that context. So I see it and I'm like, shit, how do I do this? I can't do both of these things, Tsunetomo, come on.
Mhm.
But I think, if you can try to view it in that lens and go, okay, these things are both valuable, how do I trade off against them? That gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. And I think this is a funny thing with Westerners in general, at least my perspective of Western lifestyle, is that we want the bullet pointed, like Neuro said, you want the book that's going to tell you in the first 5 pages of the things to do, and then you just follow 1 through 5 and you become a GM, StarCraft player, or whatever it is your goal is going to be. But life's just not like that. Life's not that way. You have to have both sides of the coin, and you have to strive for moderation and balance in your life, and that goes along especially in these stressful situations that you put yourself in StarCraft, right? This is why StarCraft is partly why StarCraft is so difficult, is that you put yourself into this difficult position and you are really essentially fighting yourself out of those positions, because a lot of times it's about mistakes we make and our desires and our preconceived notions and our way of thinking that ends up losing us games or making us feel bad about StarCraft.
It's a beautiful thing about getting good at the game is it's a personal pursuit. That's basically why I went for StarCraft, was that it was a 1v1 format. Uh, by my focus, I was more of a MOBA gamer and a MMORPG gamer whenever I was starting a Twitch stream, and I was thinking, what do I want to stream as my main game? I knew that I wanted to bring a lot of conversation about mindset, tilt management. You could pick any number of games for tilt management. Lots of games for tilting. But I ended up going with SC2 because that would mean that I didn't have to rely on a team sticking together. I was on a Han team that did play in some tournaments, and it ended up losing a few players, so the team collapsed. And I said, well, if I play on my own, I don't really have to rely on that. I can just demonstrate my own personal growth and take all responsibility for all my losses. And that was a huge, like, refreshing feeling for me, going from poker, which you have a lot of random variance in whether or not you do well on a given day, irrespective of your performance. Uh, there was none of that. And there's also none of the teammate variance of today I got carried big time. My teammates were just on the ball, really focused, really good players. And I won a bunch, but maybe I played like crap. Or the flip side of I played really well today and I just got dealt a really crappy set of opponents and my MMR went down. StarCraft, it's all you. And that's beautiful. And I get a little bit rustled sometimes when I lose a match and people in the chat say, well, it's a shame that Protoss is so overpowered because Neuro really worked hard that game. Don't you try to take that loss from me. I know that I was supply blocked and I lost too many drones to the Oracle harass and all this, and then the Protoss kind of ran away with the game. But they'll say something about Storm later on when I know my early game was terrible.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it's almost a sort of downward spiral that has happened over a handful of years where you have enough toxic streamers out there, or enough streamers that I don't even want to say toxic, enough streamers that don't want to view a loss in the way that you're describing and would rather say, effing Storm, why? Blizz, please. And they sort of condition chat to expect, hey, what the streamer wants after a loss is Protoss is bullshit. And that will make the streamer feel better, and we'll queue the next game and we'll move on. So more people in chat say Protoss is bullshit, and then more streamers kind of, it just sorts of feed itself, right? And I really have always appreciated that about your stream, Neuro, that you have made such a concerted effort to sort of change the conversation around that. It's one of the things that made me want to stream. I just thought of something that I meant to say towards the beginning of our discussion here, because this book is a little bit of a departure from some of the sort of more, hard science, like this is how you memorize things and whatnot that we have done in the past. I initially was wondering a lot, like, how will this book be applicable to StarCraft? Like, it's fun, it's interesting to read, I'm into it, but how am I gonna map it back to Archives Book Club stuff? And I realized that while a lot of this is just life advice, the life advice that's in the book is useful for my StarCraft in the sense that I'm going to talk to other humans, and I might talk to them about my StarCraft games or other stuff. And if I don't have, just to use an example we already talked about, a good balance between whether I should listen and trust them or whether I should defer to my own judgment and my own sort of life narrative and the thrust of what I'm trying to do, I'm going to be lost. So while, yes, this book is kind of just life advice and stuff, it tells you, it's so generally applicable that it can't help but influence your StarCraft. So that's just something I wanted to kind of throw out there for everybody to sort of use as a little bit of a framing for the discussion.
I thought similarly, when I started reading this book, I thought, well, how is this actually going to relate this, life and times of this older, former samurai Buddhist guy? And there's this somewhat famous quote that's repeated several times in the translation that I read, and I'll bring it up here because I think it's quite an interesting one, and I think there's a lot of meaning to it. The way of the samurai is found in death. If by setting one's heart right every morning and evening, one is able to live as though his body were already dead, he gains freedom in the way. His whole life will be without blame, and he will succeed in his calling. And it's sort of like, oh, I guess we're just supposed to accept that we're going to die. And there's ways to interpret this, but you hear this a lot from soldiers who have fought in modern wars as well as ancient wars, that war is such a terrible and awful and traumatizing experience that a soldier can really only operate effectively if they think of themselves as already being dead, that there's no this coming of death, that they can kind of remove themselves from the situation. And so how do we translate that into our happy-go-lucky game of StarCraft? It's sort of separating yourself and your ego from the situation of winning and losing, and I'm tied to this rank or MMR, or this, I'm going to blame something because I can't personally take the idea that I did something wrong or I have fault. And I feel like this quote embodies this idea that if we can let go of these things, then we can sort of apply this knowledge to StarCraft and really do some deep learning.
I have thought about that quote in the StarCraft context, and to me, death is losing in the match, which is a bummerooski, but that's not, it's something that happens to everyone. If you play StarCraft, you will necessarily lose games. And death in StarCraft, losing the match, to me is the role of the student, where the opponent is your teacher, you are the student, and the teacher, as Bruce Lee put it, points to your weakness, which is that's not an endpoint that you should be afraid of. Oh no, Ryan beat me in the tournament on Monday. What is the community going to think? That I lost against this player. He's a pretty heckin' good player. I don't feel bad about losing against him. And the way that he beat me is something that I can definitely study from. And I know that I'm not quite as good against that style. So for me to go over those games was an opportunity rather than something that I need to be scared of, oh geez Louise, the people saw me lose a series on TV, fam. What's the name of Neuro worth now that I lost to Ryan? Who heckin' cares? Usually you're the person who cares the most about that loss, but every loss can teach you a lesson, so crack open the replays, write down a couple of the lessons, and I did learn some stuff from him, so thank you, Ryan, for the good series. And for the next tournament series, I might not get as far, I'm pretty much guaranteed to get knocked out before the finals, so I'm going into it with the mindset of the student. This tournament is like a big old library that's really difficult with a bunch of booby traps and stuff, and I'm not going to make it through, but I can gain some knowledge while I'm there, so the next time I enter into that arena, I'll be more prepared. So it's about the flow of always moving forward, and that ties into a quote that I feel was pretty close to my tagline, which is
Oh, I
mastery
saw
is a
this one.
path.
Yeah.
Mastery is a path. I've had that on my overlay for a while, and I think I really wanted to bring this to StarCraft because with the way that they structure league placement, a lot of people start to self-identify with their league. And I felt like that was incorrect. Oh, I'm a diamond player. Oh, I'm a masters player. Are you? Or are you someone who is, as you keep playing and practicing, your rank is changing? You are an individual on your own path. And this is the quote: "It is unwise to be fixated on a single point of completion. A man who has devoted himself to his studies and believes he has reached a consummate level will assume his training has finished, but this is erroneous. Devotion to the study of one's path, first acquiring the fundamentals, and then continuing to refine your knowledge and skills, is a lifelong pursuit with no end. Without becoming content with your level of accomplishment, think critically of everything and spend your entire life traveling the path asking, 'How can I find the truth of the way?' Never give up the quest. Continue to practice like this, and you will uncover the way." Pretty well put.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a couple of different excerpts that jumped out at me as being so specifically mapped onto the concept of mastery as a path. And yeah, I remember I don't even know if you use the oldest overlay that had that on there anymore. But I remember many years worth of that concept. I think it's just so interesting to reframe things as that constant change because it allows you to think about it as a constant opportunity for growth instead of a challenge to stay at that level, right? How do I defend this? How do I maintain? Another thing that kind of jumped out at me, a bit anecdotal. It's very interesting that Ryan specifically was the person who got you there, and that you told that story. I have been hyping up an episode of the Pig Show that he appeared on fairly recently, and he actually spoke about this exact concept that you just did, in terms of him beating you in the tournament being an opportunity for learning for you. He has the exact same sort of mindset around it, in the sense that he, got pretty good pretty quickly, and always has just said, yeah, I lose, whatever. I'll take that as this is the next thing that I can maybe approach in my play. I don't have to wonder what I need to improve. My opponent just showed it to me, and now I can kind of devote some time to that. Or I could say, oh, you hit me with some weird cheese that I'm going to see 0.05% of the time ever, and I'm going to literally choose to not care. Hearing him say that was so empowering for me, again, because I used to do this thing where I would derail a ladder session because Twitch chat wants to talk about the obscure 111 with a bunker thing that just happened to me. All these different things that I would derail on. Now I just look at them and I type !Pig Ryan in the chat and say, I'm going to not give a shit about this. I'm going to go look for the next opponent so I can practice the thing that I'm working on. I really like all of that. I got us a bit off the mastery as a path concept, but I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the elegance of that connection to Ryan there. I think that's really neat.
I think this goes along with the idea, and it's pretty prevalent in Buddhist thinking, as well as in this book, about accepting things the way they are and not the way that you think they should be, right? So when we look at, our losses or whatever, and especially in the case of coming back to this idea of blaming the game, blaming other players, blaming whatever it is that you want to blame so you can take that loss off your shoulders. The reality is you have to accept what's out there, right? And what's out there is that, okay, when you lose, there's this great opportunity for improvement. And we often as players, I know myself lose sight of this because I'm pissed off that I didn't win and I would rather have won. So I'd rather find something that I can blame and not really accept the reality of like, well, I lost because I got supply blocked, or I lost because I lost focus, whatever. And just take that and say, well, hey, maybe this is a great opportunity to fix that error in my play and improve, or maybe, practice that, or realize I should practice that.
I'm thinking a little bit about responsibility as a muscle group of a person, where the more that you take responsibility, it's heavy, but kind of like lifting heavy weights, the more that you carry that responsibility of the mistakes you've made and the things you've done wrong, the stronger you get. So when something else happens, you're just used to picking up that responsibility.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think ultimately to do otherwise is sort of a self-deception and not really productive in the end anyway. Essentially what you're trying to do is avoid discomfort, right? And I don't even think that you end up achieving that goal by shirking the responsibility by saying, oh my god, Storm is so imbo, oh my god, I hate mutas, or whatever it is. I think that you essentially self-perpetuate it because you create the fallacy that, oh, mutas are bullshit and I can't defend them because they're bullshit, not because of a deficiency in myself. So I'm going to excuse the fact that I'm bad at defending them, and I'm going to lean on this excuse, and I will never get good at them because I've already concluded that I can't because the game is imbalanced, right? It's almost a way of giving up the locus of control.
Yeah. And that's something that we as StarCraft players, it's been in the scene for a long time. I mean, as far as I can remember playing StarCraft, this has been something that people will post on forums and they talk about in chats of X unit is imbalanced, or this is broken and this is BS. And um, it's the mastery as the path is unfortunately not the prominent way of thinking in our community. And I think one of the things Eric and I have tried to do with this podcast, at least for ourselves, is to promote this idea of like, let's worry about improving. Let's worry about using these lessons that we're given every time we play. And there's so much that can be learned in StarCraft, but also just in life in general. And making mistakes is okay. This is something that I came across in the book that comes up a few times, is that making mistakes is an okay thing to do. Once you accept that, then you can start using that knowledge of, okay, let's fix those mistakes. And in the book, it's quoted that if we were cast aside every man who had made a mistake, we probably couldn't find any useful men, right? And this is a obvious thing, is that no one is perfect. No one is able to off the bat just play perfect games every time you go on ladder, or if every tournament you enter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go
making
ahead, Aaron.
mistakes is something that is also an arena where you can improve. If you make a mistake and people see that, they see a human being because they make mistakes too. They see someone they can relate to. And recovering from a mistake is an opportunity where if everyone makes a mistake, your reaction to it and weaving that into a flow that's entertaining and fun for people is awesome. And that's one of the best things that you can work on as a person. So you shouldn't be scared of falling down. I think, to give a physical analogy, it's sort of like being able to roll when you fall as opposed to going splat. If gravity is a force in the universe, we're all going to fall sometimes. So you can work on that skill of, sometimes I go on the pylon show and I fumble with my words a little bit. That's okay, because everyone does. And whenever I'm going on the show, I want to try my best, and I can feel that elevated stress level and all this. And I know that it's going to be recorded and lots of people are going to see it. But every guest makes a few small mistakes on a show, and that's totally fine. So embrace your mistakes. That's part of what makes us human. Study the mistakes. It's all just fun information. And I feel like putting yourself and all your reputation and everything at stake for every ladder match or every little performance and show that you do, it's just way too much pressure to put on yourself. Doing a ladder match is like a lap in the pool, I think, where you have an opportunity to exercise, you can grow, and you can improve through it. but you have a lot more laps left, and you want to figure out how it could have been a little bit better, but then you got to get in the next one.
Yeah, very, very
That's a great
cool.
point.
I also noted a quote, I think in a passage either right before or right after this one, along the lines of someone who has aired once is more reliable and trustworthy than someone who has never aired, which is kind of sort of the same concept, right? I think another cool thought that I had as you were kind of talking through that, Neuro, is this idea that there's also sort of an opportunity for leadership if you've just made a mistake, right? You can model the behavior that you're talking about by saying, "Hey, here's me, and this is the growth process that I'm going through. And yeah, I just made that mistake and I'm actually feeling frustrated right now. I really, don't like that gap in my play. It's something that I've been meaning to work on, but I've been prioritizing other things or whatever the case may be." And by being a little bit transparent about that, you can kind of show, hey, this is a process by which you too, dear viewer, might, it doesn't have to be a viewer. It could be somebody in a room at work, right? This is a process by which you too could sort of approach a mistake, an embarrassing mistake that you just made. And it's almost, it's funny because it sounds a little bit arrogant, right? Here, let me just show you how to, make mistakes and whatever. But I think what it really is a means of fooling yourself into a better behavior by saying, I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard. I'm going to hold myself to the standard of setting a better example instead of a worse example for the people around in this room, the people in Twitch chat, the people at the work meeting, whatever it is, and be a little more forthcoming about that process and really kind of own the mistake in a way that is a little more healthy, I think, and a little more kind to yourself as well. I do want to say before the moment passes too much, thank you so much, Pig, for dropping the raid on us. We don't have any of the alerts and stuff on right now, but I appreciate everybody hanging out with us. You're coming in about right about halfway through, actually. We're talking about the book Hagakure, which was Neuro's suggestion. And yeah, we're going to just kind of touch on some philosophical stuff, some life advice stuff in the book, and kind of relate it back to StarCraft as we see kind of those connections.
I had some interesting notes here about in terms of this giving advice and coaching, and Eric you had some pointed out some
Oh,
things
this is where we get to
as
fight.
well. Yeah, well, it's interesting because I, it might just be me, quite literally, in the way I think about not how I would coach, but how I would prefer to receive advice from a coach. And so I'll read the quote, and then we can, I think, discuss this. I think we would all have interesting things to say about it. Praise his good points and use every device to encourage him, perhaps by talking about one's own faults without touching on his, but so that they can occur to him. So this would be a coach giving advice, and then somebody would have introspection about that. And what do you think?
Giving feedback to another human being about how they can improve is one of the most delicate things. People are very quick to fall into that situation of, oh boy, I'm getting lectured now, or I'm being talked down to, and they feel defeated and demoralized. So, as a teacher, as a coach, and even just as a friend and fellow peer, sometimes the person did fuck up, and you know how they could have done it better. But being able to hand that to them in a way that they feel galvanized and they feel like they understand now and that they're figuring it out, that's a very positive mindset. To feel like they're being scolded is a very negative mindset, but the situation could go either way depending on how it's delivered. And the delivery of the information sometimes is more important than the actual information itself, just in how it makes other people feel. And it's interesting that he recognizes this as a samurai to other samurai, where oftentimes we think of being more delicate or tactful as something that's gentle and not masculine, where you should just be tough enough to just get the very blunt information of you fucked up here, just get better, brah, you're bad. I think a lot of that angry coach stuff has been hammered into us as an acceptable form of teaching and learning, when you would just look at the utility of it. Is it the most effective teaching method to berate your student? No. Can sometimes a very hardy student get a rough piece of advice and they take it well? Yes. But like Bruce Lee is saying, the teacher should adapt to the student. How is the student's morale right now? Do they need to be encouraged and picked up a little bit? Or are they a little bit too full of themselves? Because you can get the full range of students of someone who thinks they're God's gift to the game and they need to be humbled a little bit. And then some other people who are just shaky and scared trying to play and they need a big amount of support.
Yeah, it's such a tough subject. I picked out the quote around. Actually, I didn't write the quote, but I wrote the sort of the thrust of it, which is you even have to judge whether or not you should give your opinion, and you have to look at sort of what is this person's nature, right? Are they the shaky, nervous kid that Neuro's talking about? Are they the arrogant student? And the thing that actually I took away most from this section of the book was the idea of pointing out whatever you're trying to teach them by addressing your own faults in a way that it will naturally occur to them. Oh, there's a lesson for me there too. Maybe it's not the same thing, right? You don't want to be disingenuous and claim a fault of the person who you're teaching that you don't actually have. But maybe there's something tangential that you have that you genuinely are struggling with. Oh, I want to really improve this part about myself. And by saying it, you're able to spark their brain with the thing that you're trying to give them. And I struggled with it a bit, and I think maybe this is sort of, I'm guessing, Adrasith, but I think this might be where your potential disagreement comes from. Like, it feels a little bit dishonest, right? It feels a little bit like I'm manipulating the student. And I've often struggled with things like that, right? If you're smart enough to know what effect a certain tone or certain word choice will have on a person, is it wrong to put them in that emotional place, right? Is it because it is manipulative, right? It's manipulative in a way that is trying to be helpful to them. And is that sort of morally acceptable to do, right? Is it fine for me to tell this story about the thing that I'm struggling with, knowing that it will spark the lesson that I'm trying to give to the student? Thoughts there?
Yeah, it's tough, right? I completely agree. And I think this is another case where we read in Hagakure that, on one hand, it's like, do this, but on the other hand, it's like, well, don't do that, right? And you're supposed to kind of gauge and use your knowledge and wisdom to understand the situation. And when it comes to giving advice to others, and for me, this is also I kind of think of it as the self-narrative of, condescending, like, oh, you're bad at the game and you should do better. Is that a good way to encourage yourself to learn? And we know from Inner Game of Tennis, it's not. But it occurred to me when I read this part, it reminded me of Josh Waitzkin's book, The Art of Learning, where we had the example of the two children where one is told that, oh, you're really smart. And when you do bad on a test, it's like, well, that teacher gave you a bad test. It's not your fault. And that kid doesn't do as well as the other kid who's learning to work hard, and that their work and effort in learning and practicing will pay off even if they stumble along the way. And so I find it's a difficult lane to travel down of, right. You have to evaluate the person you're talking with, whether it be yourself or another person external to yourself. Maybe they do have some arrogance that need to be swatted down a little bit, or maybe they do have some self-confidence that needs to be brought up a bit. And I think there's a lot of ways this can go. But when I was thinking of it for myself, I thought what I would prefer more is, tell me what is wrong and tell me what my potential is. I don't need to be complimented. My personal feeling, I don't need to be complimented. But that doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody is like me.
Interesting.
It is pretty weird dynamic of trying to communicate effectively to what people's potential is, because it can also be a hindrance. If you tell someone that their potential is very high, they can want to be carried by their gifts and talents rather than develop a really sturdy work ethic for themselves. So I think focusing on how the student can practice effectively and train hard, as opposed to, you're actually in the upper percentile of giftedness, so good job. Go and tell everyone what your IQ score is and feel very good about yourself. Also, feel free to slack off on everything because you learned faster. That's a pretty common trap that people fall into, where they just feel so damn smart that, well, if I lost, then it must have been something that was kind of unfair involved. And we did get conditioned pretty heavily with a strong culture of self-esteem is the most important, where making the kid feel like they're great. You're just a fantastic child who can do anything that you want. It's not totally honest in a lot of cases. People are given very different gifts and talents and that kind of thing. And it also doesn't accomplish the objective. Maybe you do have aptitude for this or that field, but you have all the study ahead of you still. So better get to work.
Yeah, it also can make people feel unsafe as well, right? It sort of cuts both ways in the sense that if you tell someone you're so smart and of course you're going to ace all of the tests and then they hit something that is genuinely a struggle. And it could be for any reason. It could be the subject is a particular sticking point for them. It could be they had a teacher whose style didn't mesh with them. It could be you spaced out for the wrong 30 seconds in that math class and missed a critical building block, and now you are screwed until you ever find somebody who can remedially give you that chunk you missed. And then all of a sudden, that smart kid is thinking, oh my God, I'm broken. For the last 9 years of grade school, it's been easy street and nothing but pats on the back. And all of a sudden, oh shit, I got a B on the test. Now what? And it can be, I've experienced this. It can be a deeply jarring thing where you're like, oh no, am I a valuable human deserving of love anymore? Because I got a B on this test, right? It's like, it really, really sets up a fragile mental state, I think, when you do this to a person. And we see it come out in competition, certainly, where a lot of those folks, like myself, who, do get nervous, get a little rattled if they make a mistake in front of a crowd. It's that type of dynamic, I think, oftentimes that is sort of underlying. Oh gosh, what are they going to think? I'm supposed to be Diamond 1, and I'm mucking around in Diamond 3 now. Am I still worthy? But I saw, Neuro, you've been contorting your hand to try to hold pages for a while. Should we let you hammer out a couple quotes here?
Oh, it's not really a rush. I'm also trying to figure out which one is relevant to where we go, because we're veering around a little bit. It's not just like a boom, boom, boom from this to that and the other thing.
Right. I can.
There
I
was
can do
one
another
river with this one.
Here's one. This is a little bit in a different realm, but I felt that this speaks to many people in the world these days, really, in general. If you are unaware that the world is teeming with ineptitude from the beginning, you will develop a bitter countenance, and in turn others will eschew you. So I think this has to do with expectations of how well people should execute anything in life and what service you deserve as a consumer, as a citizen, as a bystander, all this kind of stuff. And how humans are not adapted to technology and all this kind of stuff. Like, a lot of this is very new and we don't understand how exactly we're meant to regulate these activities. Stuff like social media has been shown to be pretty unhealthy in a lot of ways. So just being compassionate on human beings and knowing that people fuck up. Everyone does. And if you're expecting that, like when you order food and one thing is messed up, do you need to go into a rage at the waiter for that? Or does every waiter forget one of the things every now and then? It does happen. So just having that sense of calm and that knowledge that there will be mistakes ahead. Sometimes they'll be my mistakes. Sometimes they'll be other people's mistakes. But having compassion, it makes you have a lot more sunshine and joy just in your bearing than, God damn, they don't know how to cook steaks. God damn, they don't know how to do a heckin' podcast. They don't know how to do anything. Back 100 years ago, people used to do things way better. That whole attitude, it really is a drag on everyone's forward momentum, and it becomes more of a conversation about judging people as opposed to how can we patch this up? How can we improve this in some way? How can I brighten this situation just with a good attitude and some encouragement instead of judgment and resentment and bitterness? Because that anger that you express toward other people who have made mistakes, you're raging at your teammate because maybe they did make a mistake, but that rage is negativity that they feel and then now they're carrying. So the mood of the whole team is now lowered. You didn't encourage them, you didn't cheer them on, you beat them down. And then after the game, you carry even more bitterness of, man, that was a bad teammate and I'm pissed at them. That's tanking your whole day.
Yeah, it's negative MMR when you have bad comms with your teammate. Instead of looking at that mistake as an opportunity, hey, my teammate struggles with this. Today's a learning opportunity for them to grind that skill, and I need to hold up my end of, whatever sport or game we're playing and give them an opportunity to learn and view them as an investment. I think the beginning example that you gave of the waiter who messed up your order ties really well into the samurai value of compassion, right? For your fellow human, realizing like there is a person who is trying their honest best to just get you your food today. And the only thing they want is to do that right and not get hit. They just don't want to get yelled at today. They didn't mess up your order because they didn't like your face. They messed up your order because, they're on hour 7 of their double shift and they're tired and, they had to close last night and they're fighting with their significant other and whatever else is going on. So, yeah, I think it goes a long way when you can cut people some slack. I think there's an interesting foil to this in a different passage of the book where Tsunetomo's talking about this diary of regret that he used to keep, right? It's like I write down all the shit about my day that I thought was bad and sucked and I messed up. And he says, even today, when I think about the day's affairs after going to bed, there's never a day when I did not make some blunder in speaking or some activity. Living without mistakes is truly impossible. And he goes on to say in this passage, like, I did this diary of regret thing for a while, and I eventually realized, like, at the end of every day, I'm writing so much stuff in here, like, this is pointless. I'm not having any good days here. It's every day is just 20 mistakes. Like, I guess this is just what life is. Why am I taking a chunk of my evening to sort of perseverate on this, right? It's pointless.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes up in the book really a lot. It's something I noticed as I was reading through is this idea of mistakes. And we make mistakes, and humans aren't perfect, and you're going to mess up, and it's okay. This is something that it's hard to remember in the moment when you're upset or angry with yourself or angry with somebody else. And like Neuro, you're saying, the waiter messes up your meal, and I would say a lot of people immediately pull out their phone and, boy, I'm going to hashtag this guy on Twitter and teach him a lesson, right? And that's what we do nowadays. We just have this outrage for things that don't go our way, rather than just realizing that the world is full of mistakes and we are not perfect. I try to remember this when I get stuck in traffic, right? That, man, I'm stuck in traffic. And it's like, well, there's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of people out on the road with me. And if just a few of us make mistakes, then there's a traffic jam. And that's what happens, right? And I could be one of those people because I've made mistakes driving my car around. So why should I be so upset that somebody else made a mistake? It's a real central theme to life in general.
A couple things you mentioned there, I think, point to a larger life lesson, which is people are dealing with struggles that you don't know about on a daily basis. A person, they make a mistake, like you're saying, maybe they closed last night, maybe they have some relationship thing that's happening right now, and they're carrying a lot of weight that is invisible to you. All you see is the end result of their behavior, and they're still responsible for their behavior. We all are. But at the same time, much of it is this huge invisible weight that they have on their shoulders that you don't know about, but it's dramatically impacting their performance. Just having some kindness and compassion where you're someone who they pass by who picks them up instead of pushes them down, which is really important. And this ties into something that kind of surprised me, but at the same time, I'm really happy about. A samurai is respected first because of his proper manners. Scoffing at others in such an uncouth way is to be expected among men of low rank. Whoa.
Yeah.
Samurai are known for manner first? That's pretty awesome. That made me feel pretty proud of the StarCraft community of having a culture of GLHF and GG. Not everyone always does it, but more than a lot of other competitive games, we have that dynamic of we go into a match respecting our opponent, because without them, we don't have a StarCraft match. And there should be some gratitude there. And just conducting yourself in a way where you face an opponent, maybe they beat you, That's really crucial because I've had some opponents who go on and talk shit about me, and then some people who just focus on what they could have done better. Pig was a great example of this. Whenever we played in the tournament, he was going over the replays after and focusing on what his mistakes were. A lot of people will just say, look at this guy. His strat is so dumb. I can't believe someone would do something so dumb. He only won because his strategy was so stupid. That attitude, I feel like, distracts from what you need to work on. And it's also disrespectful to the other person and all the effort they put in. Like, maybe it is a very obnoxious build. Ryan blocked my natural with the probe into a huge adept timing, and it's really hard to defend the adept shading through your bases when you had to take your natural at the third base location. And I was looking at the ESL website, and at the end of a match, when you report the results, you can check a box that said the opponent's play was unpleasant, and I did think about it. But that's what you're supposed to do. That's the essence of the game, is I'm trying to keep my opponent as off balance as possible until they quit the game. Like, these people, they're playing matches and they want to have the perfect macro game, and they're looking for the perfect loss, where I will only GG if my opponent plays the most impressive, robust, strict, and well-timed macro game that I would see in the highest levels of play. If that happens, I'll GG. But if I know that they lost a unit early on, I know that they're a bad player and I just threw. That's a really, I think, immature attitude when a samurai would have manners. Even if on the inside you feel like, that fucking build, I hate that build. You can feel like that, that's fine. But outwardly, you can still say, well done, GG, at the end. There are so many times. I don't know if people in the chat can tell whenever I'm in a game and like how I feel. Maybe my face tells a little bit of the story. But there are some times when I GG it, then I'm like, fuck, I really don't like what they did there.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've actually kind of thought about this a fair amount because you talk on your stream, Neuro, a lot about composure and how you get the choice as the person in this situation to fly off the handle and smash your keyboard or scream at the mic or talk about balance or whatever it is, or you can GG out of the game and think about maybe what you need to improve and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of people misread your composed manner on stream as, oh my gosh, Neuro's just on such an even keel emotionally. He's not feeling anything when this happens. And the more that I've watched you and had opportunities to speak with you on talk shows and stuff, I've learned that isn't true. That stuff's rattling around in there. It's just you get to choose how to deal with it, right? And you choose the ways it comes out. I do not have the degree of emotional control and composure that you do. So when I'm flustered on my stream, people can see that I'm frustrated or I'm upset. I still GG out, and I still will try to redirect the blame onto myself. Oh gosh, I'm really bad at defending mutas, hitting multiple bases from weird angles. But I'll just sort of say, God, this is so annoying. I'm really frustrated with my inability to defend these mutas. And I think a lot of people, have an easier time reading something like that, where it's like very outward, right? I'm really down on myself in that moment, which is maybe not good, right? I'm almost setting a bad precedent there. Whereas your composed manner sort of does this other thing where people just wonder, oh, is he this, Zen monk that is just special somehow, and I can't do this. He's able to do it because he has this gift. Any thoughts there? I don't know that I've ever brought this subject up with you.
Yeah, just for some basic scenarios that I would say I would consider to be obnoxious, and whenever I lose to them, I feel pretty grumpy on the inside. The double gateway stalker shield battery cheese.
Yep.
Where you put that between the main and the natural. That one is profoundly unpleasant to lose to. There's one where a player will hide 4 barracks on the map for a pretty long time, and they're very far away, and just pull up quite a few Marines. And then when my natural is done, and I've made my 20th drone, and I'm looking for their natural, I don't find it. Suddenly a whole bunch of units show up, and then bunkers are built, and it looks like the 2 racks build, but it's actually 4 racks, so they can push up into your main. That one is also very deeply frustrating. And there are a bunch of different situational issues that are tough to deal with. High ping is one that I've been working on managing my tilt on. It's a huge advantage. And I will note that in the games I played against Pig on Monday, it was on US West. And I was really excited because US West is fantastic. That's a 200 ping difference for me in just how everything moves. So whenever you hold down the button to make a round of drones, you have to hold on to it for an extra 200 milliseconds for it to register how many workers you want it to make. The game is just way more difficult. So framing things is a huge way that you can take these tilting situations and just make them a little bit less tilting. So with the high ping thing, I would say, okay, I'm fighting with weights on. I know that factually it is more difficult for me to win this game than my opponent, but that's something that I cannot change now. It's been dealt Australia server, Singapore server, Brazil server. This is my life. So I'm going to try to play smart instead of try to play fancy micro. So I just give myself a basic adjustment. I give myself some credit too, and giving yourself credit for facing adversity is really important. And I just proceed with the match. So yesterday during Samurai Stream, I faced 3 opponents on Singapore server and I didn't lose. And my mindset was really good, where I was saying, okay, you have a nice ping advantage, but this is what the server decided for me, and I will fight you as best I can. And if I win, all the more credit to me. I feel like a badass. So being able to give yourself credit where credit is due so that you have some confidence in yourself, you can feel like you can advance with a bold attitude as opposed to like a timid and frustrated one. I think a lot of people go at the ladder wanting the ladder to be different than it is. Like, I wish StarCraft was just a little bit different. Infestors were a little better. Mines were a little bit worse. Protoss was a little bit nerfed. Skytoss is a little bit too strong. And they're in that space wishing that it was a different space than it is. Instead of just going in there, accepting all the facts of the battlefield, and then fighting.
That's a really good point, is the accepting the way things are. Again, I'm coming back to this accepting the way things are. And I have to point out something that you brought up, Neuro and Era, you both brought this up, is that StarCraft has exported this really beautiful thing to the rest of esports. Since we were kind of the first esports and the streaming really blew up around StarCraft 2 coming out, we say, good luck, have fun, and GG at the end of games. And most of the time that's true. And you see that in a lot of other games now. People will say good game afterwards, and there's sort of this level of sportsmanship that comes out. And just to reiterate that this actually does happen, not once, but twice last night. And one of the players was a Terran. So I want to just point that out. One Terran, this is Diamond League, and a Zerg. After they lost, not only did they say GG, they messaged me and say, that was a really good push. How do I defend against that? How do I beat that? And we had this like awesome discussion about how to get better at StarCraft. And it was very interesting to see the opponent's perspective on how they're like, man, what do I do versus that? What do I build? That is really cool. And we have that in the community. Sometimes we forget we have that in the community because we get a little bit angry. We see other players who maybe are a bit BM, but we still have that in the community. We still say good luck, have fun in the beginning. We still say GG at the end. And there are people who are out there just like us who want to learn and get better. And sometimes, maybe a loss gets the best of them and they get a little bit upset, but don't we all, right? Don't we all make that mistake? So it's something really nice about StarCraft.
Yeah, a very powerful thing you can do is think about your opponent and what they did well, or think about your opponent and what they did that, man, really just grinds your gears and was annoying in that game, and say, GG, your Muta harass is really good, or GG, oh my gosh, I didn't expect you to drop from that angle, or whatever it was. And what you're doing with that is transferring all of that yucky rage, just like, I can't believe I just lost that game over that, into, oh, I lost because my opponent is skilled. I lost because my opponent developed something in their play that is very troublesome for me as their opponent, and they are deserving of recognition for that. And yeah, I lost to it, but I lost to it because they worked hard. I didn't lose to it because I'm shitty. I lost to it because they're good. and it almost can flip it on itself. I almost try to make myself do it more if I am pissed. So if you ever watch my stream and you see me compliment somebody, that might be a clue. Along these lines, there's a sort of passage that touches on having a more stoic approach, kind of like what you were saying, Neuro, with having high ping in a tournament. And the passage is talking about, it's raining really hard, and you have kind of these two options, right? You can sort of run underneath the eaves of the houses along the route to wherever you're going and pretty much still get soaked. Or you can walk your ass in a straight line wherever you're going, get the same soaking, having accepted the fact that you were going to get wet from the beginning. The way that he phrases it is resolve yourself from the beginning and you won't be perplexed. And I really, really like this because I've definitely been thrown situations in my life where, I'll give a concrete example rather than be too vague about it. So I've struggled with my health a fair amount since like my mid-20s. And like my digestion is kind of messed up, and I have to be really careful about what I eat, and different chemicals and mess me up. I'm hospitalized over it and all this different stuff, right? And something like that is pervasive, right? It's a systemic thing that is a part of your life every day. You go out to lunch with your coworkers. Oh shit, can I eat there? What can I eat there? Is it going to be fine? Do I need to bring lunch? Do I need to eat beforehand? How do I do it? We're very social animals around eating. You go to family holiday. Again, it's a thing. Is Eric going to eat at the holiday, or is he going to have eaten beforehand? And so having something like that sort of pressing on you in a systemic way in your life kind of puts you in the space to figure this out, which is sort of a blessing in its own right, because you can sort of view it as this like, I've been dealt this thing that just makes every single day so inconvenient. Or you say, okay, I have this. I got to deal with this however I can. And now I can maybe look at it as leverage, right? Now I can go, oh, okay, this is like forced self-discipline, right? I'm not going to eat the junk food because I can't, because I'll end up in the hospital. So now I just eat healthy, right? Well, that's kind of cool. That's no longer a choice for me. So I don't have the struggle over the cake or the cookies that somebody else might. And this for me kind of rang true, this passage about like, you're going to get the same soaking whether you run under the eaves of the houses or just walk in a straight line. It's a very powerful thing in your life in general to just be like, this is how it is, and I'm doing this anyway. I just really kind of like that concept a lot.
Yeah, there are a lot of pieces of advice about determination and effort and focus on a singular purpose. And I think that is something you can take as an abstraction from the way of the samurai that's really useful to. I don't think anyone here is officially a samurai. That's kind of a role that is no longer needed. Our society is much less violent than it once was, so you don't really need a bodyguard who's going to fight to the death so that you don't have to. It's more institutions of police and military and that kind of thing. So very different era, very different times, but knowing what your focus is at any given moment and how to drive in that direction, despite the wind in your face, despite the floods and the doubts and all the opponents that you're faced with, and just moving toward your goal in some way and having that be something that you can strive for. The author makes it feel like the way of the samurai is achievable, which I think is an important thing with tone. A lot of it is kind of lecturing and scolding and a little bit of the boomer wisdom of y'all young kids don't know what you're doing. But overall it is, I'd say, a pretty encouraging read. It does give you a lot of instances where you're faced with some kind of difficulty or a complex situation, and this is how you would just strike right through it. I did have some viewers yesterday compare this to Book of Five Rings. They're like, is it like Book of Five Rings? That was a good talking point of the difference between these two individuals who are the authors of this. Miyamoto Musashi may have been the best duelist to ever live. There are tons of reported duels, and he just kicks ass. He's a really, really good fighter, and he talks about specific strikes, how to wield his sword. So he was dual wielding katanas. One of them was pretty much full size in his right hand, and the other one is pretty much full size as well. And his recommendation was give two full swords to a young child as they're growing up, and they'll just get used to the weight and grow into it instead of limiting yourself to one. This author, less decorated in terms of battle, From what I can tell, he was a pretty run-of-the-mill samurai in terms of his fighting ability, but it was the dedication and service to his lord that he felt like he was exceptional on. Where it's not about me being the best swordsman in all the land, it's about me really fulfilling my purpose of being the best retainer I can be for this lord who is my boss, basically.
Yeah, it's very empowering, that message in the book of essentially saying, I've got whatever abilities I've got, and I can choose to use those to the fullest extent that I'm able, regardless of the outcome. And there are lots of examples of, actual fighting and duels and things where it's like, if you've come to the conclusion that you have to fight this person to the death and you know you're going to lose, don't sneak around and try to do some bullshit where you kill him while he's asleep. Just like fight him and lose and get it over with, because that sort of matches the samurai ideal. And I think, while I don't advocate for us running around in the street killing each other, the idea of running at your goals in that way, like, I have whatever skill set I have, here's what I think needs to be done, and I'm just going to go full bore at that because that's what I think is the right thing to do, and let the chips fall where they may, is a very empowering way to kind of approach things. A couple quick sort of meta things. Thank you very much, Shui, for the raid. Appreciate you so much. Everybody, please go follow her on Twitch as well. And I see that we're kind of coming up pretty close to time here, fellas. Neuro, do you have any more quotes you want to sneak in?
Sure, I marked a whole bunch of stuff. There were some things that I just highlighted because I found them to be hilarious. There was one that I don't have the page right now, but he says here that the best kind of love you could have is the kind that you never articulate to the person and you take it to the grave. To me, that just seems really dumb, like a big missed opportunity. This is the person who you love the most, and he's saying that you should never tell them, and that's the most amazing secret, hidden, forbidden love. That's very goofy, I would say. So to summarize the essence of samuraihood, first and foremost, the warrior must be devoted body and soul to his lord. In addition, he must internalize the virtues of wisdom, compassion, and courage. Although it may seem impossible to embody these three virtues, it really is easy. To nurture wisdom simply requires listening to others. Immeasurable knowledge comes from this. Compassion is for the sake of others. It is opting to do good things for other people rather than through selfish motives. Courage is found through gritting one's teeth. That is to say, gritting one's teeth and charging forward without concern for the consequences. There is no higher mindset than this. That's pretty cool. And none of that is particularly focused on combat, courage the most so, but compassion and wisdom as being two of the three most important aspects of samuraihood is pretty cool. And I think it's fairly different from the layperson's romanticized TV version of what is a samurai. Ooh, a samurai, so good with the sword. He could stop a bullet with it. I think that's more of what people think of with the way of the samurai, when a lot of it really was about how you carry yourself, what your manners are like, and how you serve the people. Because a samurai is a combat servant, basically. You're not the boss. You're not the legend fighter who everyone showers with gifts and praises and stuff. You're the bodyguard for some lord, and your job is to be the best at that you physically can. So it's interesting that it's a role that encourages a lot of selflessness when it's one that's romanticized and glorified as they're these great combat fighters.
Right, yeah. A lot of people get that wrong, for sure.
That's a recurring theme as well. I keep talking about these recurring themes, but sort of improving and getting better and being the best that you can, reaching your potential. I felt like this book emphasized that quite a bit in many different ways of, like you said, Neuro, not necessarily being this hero of the times, but rather just being the best samurai that you could be is emphasized throughout the book. And there's a quote that I took home as having a lot of meaning, I think, for us as playing a game and trying to, let's be honest, we're trying to be better at a game, but also you can use this advice to be better at life. This person is aware of the endlessness of entering deeply into a certain way and never thinks of himself as having finished. He truly knows his own insufficiencies and never in his whole life thinks that he has succeeded. He has no thoughts of pride, but with self abasement knows the way to the end. And I feel like this is a nice metaphor for us all, that this journey that we're on, in life, and in this case we're talking about StarCraft, it's never over. You never say, oh, got this, I learned all there is to learn, all right, time to relax now. There's always work to be done, and there's always a humility you want to carry with yourself in terms of your skill and your knowledge and your abilities. There's always something more you can do.
Very, very cool.
Mastery is a path.
Indeed. Can't say it better than that. Well, we do have a few sort of Q&A, like interesting messages from chat that Lord Cranial has sort of collected up here. So I think we can maybe use the last couple of minutes of the show to maybe kind of see what we all think about these. So the first one is from Stoff in chat. This is with regard to the idea that you might know that a loss is inevitable and the way that we sort of approach that emotionally or mentally or strategically. He says it seems a bit counterintuitive to go into a match, or it's this idea seems counterintuitive to the concept of going into a match having the confidence to win. I guess a better way to ask that is, how do I balance the mindset discussed with the confidence to win? These two things are kind of, it's back to that idea of there's this continuum, right? I want to be in balance on this continuum. How do I do this? Any thoughts there?
I wasn't really thinking about my confidence to win in a lot of the matches that I play in tournaments and ladder. I usually think about doing my strategy as best that I can and fighting as hard as possible and not anticipating any particular outcome. I think if you put it in terms of winning and losing, it can cause you to make a bunch of really silly mistakes when you get ahead. I've noticed that in some of my games, when I think about, I think I can win now, I tend to go really hard on my plan A and I neglect my plan B of just continuing to play out the match in the most robust and sturdy way that I can. That I think is linked with, because my opponent messed up earlier in the match, I think they will mess up against this next thing too, which is not an assumption that you can make. Maybe the Terran did lose the Reaper early on, but they could have really good recovery. They still crank out a bunch of workers. I actually fought against 4GG yesterday, and I got him down to 24 SCVs, and he ended up winning the game. So just because you get really far ahead doesn't mean that you've won. And I really caution people against saying things like, if I would have just done this one thing different, I would have won. Stop saying that.
Right.
If I would have done this one thing better, I would have been in a better spot. And I would have had more options to create more advantages, and my opponent would be in a worse spot. But you can't assume that they will necessarily die to whatever your next timed attack was going to be. They could have defended it. So you should have that kind of flexibility of, I'm not going to assume too much. I'm just going to fight as hard as I can, because that's really what matters. And that's why the pursuit of mastery in StarCraft is so rewarding and awesome. It's your own personal training and warriorship. As a person, you don't have a committee that's saying, well, there are people who have more experience here, so we're going to give them the nice spots and you're going to be doing dishes for a while. StarCraft is honest. You ladder, you face opponents, you get results, and that's all on you. And that's a really beautiful opportunity where you have silence in your comms. There's no one telling you to pick a different character or do a different strata build. You get to decide all of that for yourself. So that gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility and peace and quiet in your games. In addition to that, all the mistakes that resulted in the loss were yours. That's refreshing too, because you don't have to point at other people on all this. So just being able to use the space of StarCraft to be a better warrior is a really, really important concept that is more important than the balance patches. It's more important than your swings of winning and losing on any given week. It's about how you can hone your own ability to fight and to try really hard at something.
I love that idea. Oh, go for it.
I think there's a quote in here that I'm trying to find, but it's sort of along those lines of, really charging through. There are a lot of those in this book.
Yeah.
So if you want a set of recommendations of how to charge through difficult stuff, Hagakure is a good book for this.
Yeah, the idea of that lack of ambiguity of where the fault lies is super, super cool. I share some of your background, Neuro, of having done MMOs in the past or having done, some team games as well. And also, well, I never really got into poker. I did Magic at a pretty high level. And all three of those share this component where I can lose a game and sit there wondering, did I screw up? Was it like, did I tank the team? Everybody's flaming me, telling me I did, but I feel like I played great. Do I need to do something different? Am I playing right? And you're torturing yourself over this when you simply do not have that in StarCraft. The only thing that's there is you, the current balance patch, and the opponent, and you just work with that as best you can. And it's really a much more peaceful process, I think, to be able to navigate.
Mm.
I would add to that as well when you talk about winning, just like Eret does on his stream. If you catch his stream where he's laddering or practicing, what's your definition of winning, right? I mean, maybe your definition of winning could be just improving or improving a specific aspect of the game. And as you get higher and higher MMR in StarCraft, if you're not there already, you will know that you get matched against people that way outskill you. And it will be 3, 4, 500 MMR above you. And you really don't have a chance of beating them, probably. But boy, you have a chance to learn from those experiences. So when you go into a game like that, you get matched against somebody that, like Neuro, this probably happens to Neuro, playing the game, ladder. All of a sudden, there goes Parting on the ladder, and you get matched against Parting. Now, chances of Neuro beating Parting, I'd say pretty low, but there's a huge opportunity to learn because Parting is darn good at this game, right? We can learn a lot from that. And so when you reframe the situation of, well, is winning me playing my best and doing the best I can against something that maybe I'm not going to actually win in terms of StarCraft, but I'm going to win in terms of gaining skill and experience.
Yes, I remember the quote now, not the entire one, but he gives a recommendation of a few things that you should repeat to yourself every morning that will assist you in the way. And one of the lines is, I will never fall behind others in pursuing the way of the warrior. And that one I've used personally quite a bit, and it helps a lot, I think. And it doesn't necessarily mean improving at StarCraft at a faster rate and gaining MMR, in how I interpret the phrase when I say that to myself. I will never fall behind others in pursuing the way of the warrior. I think of the way of the warrior as the pursuit of the cultivation of your fighting spirit. That's what it is. Of me being someone who enters into difficult situations, tries my best, and then very gracefully moves into the learning aspect of reflecting on it, gathering what I can, and then pivots back into facing forward and fighting again. And how, if I'm honest with myself, if I'm trying to block in the best practice that I can, if I'm preparing as best I can, and I'm fighting as best I can, that is the way of the warrior. And I am succeeding just by being there doing that. And that's something that I think everyone can strive for. That's not precisely a results-oriented goal. It's a process. And if you get into that process, you are victorious. And that is really empowering.
Yeah, that's fantastic. This actually kind of hits on what I learned from Maynard that actually even got me over my ladder anxiety in the first place. It even enabled me to partake in the game as more than just a spectator. The idea that the very act of pursuing the improvement could be the victory, right? That I can say, this is scary. The game is hard. I don't know a lot. There are things that I don't know that I'm embarrassed. I don't know. Oh my gosh. And that just pursuing it is meaningful in its own right and could be a mission. I think is just so empowering, right? It's the kind of thing where you can't really fail at it, or at least no one can force you to fail at it. If you fail at doing this, it is your own self-control that did that on that day. And even then, it recurses on itself, and you say, okay, this is part of that experience too, and I'm going to do better the next time, and I'll keep my composure, and I'll stay on the path better. you essentially like have this ticket to continuous improvement and a worldview that is so much safer for you to develop not just your StarCraft skill, but all of these life skills and how to tackle challenges and crash right through them and all these different things. We're at time. I see one more question that I really want to do. Are you guys okay with it?
Let's do it.
All right. So we've got one. It's actually more of a comment. One from Kinrell here in the chat. She points out sometimes you need someone who can let you feel the emotions and then guide you back to where your focus needs to be. And this, I think, rings so true for me and harkens back to kind of what we were talking about with feeling out the student's nature as you're an instructor or a coach and thinking, okay, what do they need right now? You're yelling to me about balance. Do you just need to get that off your chest? Do we need to just, kind of let you chill for a minute and get back into the game? I definitely have viewers who can read my emotions and will say the right thing at the right time to kind of quell whatever's going on, get me refocused. I had this happen the other night on Ladder where somebody said something to me. I don't remember what it is or who, and I'm sorry. But I had totally forgotten that my whole mission in life that night was to put down the robo at the right time. And I'd even given myself a few seconds worth of leeway, and I had this really frustrating game that was the first one the whole night where I'd put the damn robo down on time, but I was so mad about whatever the Hellions did, like, as that was happening or whatever, that I'd forgotten to give myself a little score in my notebook that I actually hit the goal. And somebody was like, hey, I think you did your thing about the robo. Like, can we feel good about that? And it totally changed the character of my ladder session. I was so grateful for it. So I think this is really important and goes along with the idea of the sort of samurai ideal of like lifting each other up, right? That we can all be in this growth process together and sort of know, hey, he's working on that, she's working on this, and maybe give those reminders as necessary. Any more thoughts here? I kind of just blabbed for a while. I'm sorry.
That makes me think of a really important point, which is processing tilt between games is something that a lot of people neglect. There's a really common rage requeue that people do where I was frustrated by that last match and I lost and I am down MMR, so I'm just going to get into a better game. And you don't actually get to process what happened that last match, how it made you feel, and just getting to vent a little bit. That's something that I try to be compassionate about too, is it's okay to vent. If something is frustrating, like being able to air those frustrations is good, because anger is an emotion that needs to go somewhere. You can't just deny anger and say, no, I'm just not going to be affected by this. It affects you. And you should think about some responsible way that anger comes out. You could go out to your balcony and just say a potty word or something just to kind of like get it out there. You could lift some weights, do something physical. Basically, for my levels of tilt, I have different plans based on how angry I am. If I ever get above an 8 of anger, I will not talk to another person until I've taken a walk first. And I have a time to kind of gather my thoughts, form it into something that's more concrete and rational, and then come back and have more of an even conversation. You should treat your gaming practice or whatever path of mastery that you have in a similar fashion of sometimes you do have a lot of emotion and you should deal with that first before you get back to the details of what you're doing.
And you see this in the highest levels of StarCraft, especially in the GSL. There's all these bathroom breaks, right? They always take these bathroom breaks. They lose a game or win a game. It actually doesn't matter what happens. Sometimes they just need to cool off after a game because there's so much emotion going on. And you can be sure that they're going to take the maximum amount of time to process whatever just happened, get their mindset back to where it needs to be, get that calm, because we know we play best in StarCraft when we have that calm, clear mind, not that tilted mind that's thinking about those cloaked banshees from last game, right? The calm, clear mind is what plays best.
Yeah, and that ties into an aspect of Samurai Stream, which I failed to mention, and that is that I get out of my chair between every game. That's a personal rule that I set for myself that I try to abide, and I think it's huge for shaking off whatever frustration from the last match. Maybe it was an Australia server cannon rush. I can step away from the camera and the microphone and just vent a little bit, say that was obnoxious, and the opponent knows they had 200 ping and they still did that to me and I'm a little bit hurt. And if I get to say that to myself, then when I sit back down, I'm ready for my next opponent. I already got to stew on it a little bit and accept it and then move on. So be able to take breaks for yourself and get out of your chair. Sitting down all the time, it's not what our bodies are meant to do. We're meant to move and do stuff. So just getting some blood flow going, get up, get a drink of water. If you're frustrated, get out of your chair, move away from the monitor, and let yourself kind of get a soft reset. It's really, really key for having forward positive momentum where you don't get stuck on some line of tilt and frustration.
Yeah, awesome. Do you do like so I do the water break thing, which I've always been a little self-conscious, like, oh man, like take so many water breaks as a streamer. I'm always going to the BRB screen, but I do think it helps. How long of a stand-up do you do in between games on Samurai Stream? I feel like I always stop by during the analysis portion, so I haven't actually seen you do that, I don't think.
It depends on the length of the match and how frustrating the match was. I had a 31-minute, really scrappy game against Bioterran, and I just barely won, and it was a really glorious match, but it was exhausting. So I took probably 3 to 4 minutes AFK after that one. If it's a quick opponent cheesed me and I defended and it's over in 4 minutes, maybe I'll just stand up in my chair and kind of dance and move a little bit and then queue into a game. So maybe just a minute. So it kind of depends on how I feel. And putting your own health first is something that pretty much everyone should do more of. There's that sense of obligation of, well, the viewers, they need some entertainment. People have got 16 things going on anyway. If you need to go use the restroom, you shouldn't feel guilty about needing to do basic biological functions or even just being a good steward of yourself and getting out of your chair a little bit. Y'all need to get out of your chairs too, for Pete's sake. This is something that we shouldn't beat ourselves up about. We should get out of our chairs. People can wait 2 minutes. It's kind of like our attention span is so short in 2021 that people feel bad that I'm not entertaining someone with an explosion every 25 seconds. Y'all need to calm down.
Yeah,
it's sounding like a boomer now. Back in the day, people didn't have Twitter and shit.
It's interesting. It makes me think again back to balance, because I think I've also heard you talk about this idea of, especially for you as like a full-time streamer, right? You're making your living doing this and you're fighting for people's time, right? You have to deliver more value per unit of time to that viewer to make it worth their while, right?
But if you're healthy and well rested and you take your breaks, you have more vibrant, positive energy of courage and jubilation that you can share with them.
Right. Yeah.
If you're sitting in your chair and your back is hurting and you're dehydrated and fatigued and stuff, you're like, you're a gangle creature who's just chained to the chair feeling like I must serve the viewers every second of every day. No, take a break, stand up, and come back with that bright sunshine energy.
Mm-hmm. It's that advice. Eastern balance, right? That we've talked about throughout here.
Yep.
Very
Work
cool.
hard, but not too hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Be determined, but also be compassionate on yourself and your fellow human beings. Fight hard, but also have manners. This is the way of the samurai.
It's so challenging, right? But I love it. I think this is one that I'm definitely going to go back to more and more, and just refer to it a little bit at a time. Like, even here, I'll get on my soapbox here. It's the book show after all, right? Even if you're not a big reader, pick up a copy. You can find a PDF online. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Just flip through a couple, read a sentence or two. You might be surprised at what you get out of this one. I definitely was.
This is a good one to crack open to any random page and just read a few passages and see what you think. It's got that feel to it. It's
also one where if you get to a certain passage, there might be one that is really profound and speaks to you, and you just want to stop and meditate on that for the full day. That's kind of how I've read this, where it's not like how fast can I read Hagakure? Oh, it's not that long. Boom, did it in 2 days. No, I'll get to a point and I'll say, damn, that one really hits me. Let's just meditate on that for the rest of today and see how I can apply that to my life, and also kind of be skeptical of any potential downsides with this. And that's a really key part of being a good reader of texts and of knowledge, is not just passively absorbing everything, but also saying, does this make sense to me? Is this correct and is this right? Because some of the passages in this, I laughed out loud. It was so backward and silly, like the secret hidden love of never tell someone that you love them and just take it to the grave. Like, that is absurd. But it's funny. So you're not taking Hagakure and saying, okay, now we're recommending everyone to live in the way of the samurai because this was better than what people are doing these days. It's got some stuff that is so kick-ass fantastic, pick you up energy, really encouraging, fighting through hardship, having determination and grit, knowing your mortality, knowing your role in society and trying to be the best that you can be within that role. Very mixed bag, but an amazing mixed bag. I would highly recommend.
Absolutely. Definitely don't take this book's advice on the way to recover from falling off of a horse. Would not recommend you make a potion out of the feces of a dappled horse. But you know, there's lots of good nuggets of information in there for sure.
I'll definitely be meditating on this episode for a while. I think there's a lot of good knowledge that we've talked about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're gonna close out. Thank you once again, Neuro, for coming on. Everyone, I've dropped his socials. I'm sure if you're watching this, you know Neuro. You probably came here for Neuro, but if you're not following him in any one of these places, please go do it. The man makes a lot of content. There's a lot of there's probably something Neuro's doing that you're not up on, so go fix that. And thank you all for hanging out. We had a lot of viewers rated in, and it's wonderful to have you stay. If you enjoyed it, this is something that we do monthly. We have guests from the StarCraft community, whoever we can wrangle into reading a book with us out of the goodness of their heart. Neuro's doing this for free. We're actually costing him money because he's a full-time guy.
Fuck that, dude. This is some dank stuff that we're making here. What's more important than making $10 is making something that you believe to be awesome content.
Thank you.
A lot of my content is kind of like that as well, where I'm not doing Agent Smith because all the political viewers, they have lots of money. Let's get their money. It's less revenue for me than just laddering with commentary, but it's cool and it's fun, and I think it improves people's perspectives. This show is heckin' awesome. You guys are bringing on guests and talking about a lot of this wisdom that people forget about that's still there. I came into the StarCraft scene with 3 books: Sun Tzu, Art of War, Bruce Lee, Striking Thoughts, and Miyamoto Musashi's Book of Five Rings. And I saw these words and I was saying, gamers need to know about this. This is very relevant and very empowering. And y'all are acting all entitled and childish when something was written 2,000 years ago that's going to kick your ass and get you into shape. So Hagakure, I would put it in a similar category with these texts that has so many gems of knowledge and wisdom for how you can improve. It's galvanizing. It's really awesome stuff. So you guys are doing good work here, and I'm really honored to be on.
Thank
you so much, man. The kind words mean a ton.